So by the late 1900s, most of the steel mills were still located near the Great Lakes area. They were located where you still needed steel. So it's still a hub of automobile manufacture, and it was still an area of rapid home growth. There are steel mills throughout, Pennsylvania, although very few today, Ohio. And this is a topic that you will hear discussed probably in every political election for many, many years. By the late 1900s, so by 1980 or so, there was a rise in the scrap metal industry. We have a lot of areas that are suffering from decay, a lot of bridges that need to be repaired. We have a lot of waste, a lot of old factories we're not using, and there's a lot of potential in scrap metal. Just like we talked about, using agricultural waste, there's a lot of money to be made in garbage, guys. Like we talked about the cardboard box manufacturer in China and how she's made billions of dollars. Making steel from scrap metal or scrapping steel and other metals, that's big business. We can make a lot of money out of our waste. So, but the loss of the United States, their steel industry, is something that people are still holding dear. And steel manufacturers or steel factories were still shutting down, as late as like 2010. So some of the last ones in Pennsylvania were shutting down. Now we're down to very few. But like you could say, like the end of the high point of the steel industry in the United States was probably 1980. So since 1980, the steel industry has been on the decline. In fact, we went from, in 1980, we produced 80% of the steel made in the world to about 37%. So in 1980, we still made most of the steel, and it's been on the decline ever since. 1980 was 37 years ago. So it's been a long, slow decline. I don't know that we ever will be on top of steel manufacture again, and I don't know that we want to be. It is an industry that's been moving towards less developed countries, and countries that are rapidly developing right now. Like they need more steel. They're building more infrastructure, more railroads, more cars. It makes sense that East Asia is producing more steel today than the U.S. because China and Japan are making more refrigerators, more cars, more major industry. China is building up and developing, the further western part of China, the more rural area of China. Less developed countries are going to need steel more than the U.S. We're not building as much new material. So I don't know that we're ever going to get that major steel industry back. And I think that's evident by the fact that it's been on the decline since the 1980s. And so the most successful regions that used to have steel manufacture are those that have diversified their economies, and they're not just waiting for an industry to come back. And I think the same would probably be true for things like copper mining or coal mining. So let's look at car manufacturing in the United States, because our motor vehicle production was really at the heart of the industrialization of this country. It really blew up right from the early 1900s, and we were, for many years we were dominant in the automobile industry. So cars are built near their markets. Where people are buying cars, that reflects where they're being built. So what's going to change the production of motor vehicles? Of course, labor costs and material costs will impact it. But where are people buying cars? That's going to be one of the biggest impacts. The final assembly of a car is a great example of a bulk gaining operation. In North America, today we have what we call the auto alley. It's located in the interior of the U.S. and in central Mexico. In Europe, most cars are manufactured in the east-west corridor between the UK and Russia. And in East Asia, most of China's plants are located in western China. So when we look at the automobile industry, understand that today about 40% of motor vehicles are produced in East Asia, 25% in Europe, and 15% in North America. And at some point, you have a lot of people in East Asia. It's a major population center, and less people that had cars. It's a ballooning industry in East Asia. In the United States, most people already have not just one car, but multiple cars per family, right? So People are going to buy new cars because they're going to get old. People are going to get cars because they become old enough to drive. But most people in this country already have vehicles, and so it's about replacing them, getting new ones because either, planned obsolescence, you want a newer one, or yours isn't working well. In East Asia, cars are still, like, people don't always have, like, one car per household or 2 cars per household, so more people are buying them. So that industry is blowing up because it has a bigger market. It's like when cell phones first came out, and cell phone stores had, like, unparalleled growth because most people didn't have cell phones. Now that everybody has a phone, less people are signing up for plans. So today our auto industry is changing because we already have a lot. But know that even if you were buying a non-American car, it probably was built and assembled in the United States because it's very expensive to transport an entire car. So except for maybe like really high-end cars, like maybe a Ferrari would be imported from Europe. If you're getting a Toyota Corolla, that sucker was put together in the United States. A Toyota Corolla isn't sold for enough money to make it worth transporting it from Japan to the U.S. So even when you're buying non-U.S. cars, they were probably put together in the U.S. And then it gets even more complex because the pieces of that car, some were probably made in the U.S., like the big ones, like the doors and the frame and the seats, but maybe a seat buckle, right, the seat belts, or a knob for a radio or an antenna, like that could have been made near the factory that's putting the cars together, or it could have been made in a factory across the world. Like the fabric for the seats, the cotton for the sheets, the leather for the seats, depending on what car you're getting. So our cars are really examples of global products, no matter where they were purchased. It would be excellent if you could get the VIN number from your car so we could see where your car was made. So if you own your own car, it's right by the driver's side, should be under the driver's side window. And if you, your parents, they have VIN numbers too, so ask them if you can get theirs. I'll show you a picture of where to find it in class, and we can look up where your car was made. Another example of where we buy things might be the production of women's blouses. So we've got textile manufacturers located across the world, and we make a lot of clothing here in the U.S. too. But a lot of it's now being made in East Asia, Brazil. And so textiles and clothing is another example. If you look at the plants that are scaled by 2011, here's that corridor throughout North America. So here's where you're going to get most of your cars from. So if you bought a car in this country, it was probably made in this auto alley, no matter who the manufacturer of the car is. Same thing, if you're buying a car in Europe, it was probably manufactured in Europe. And of course, there are some high-end luxury vehicles that you would import from Europe. Same thing goes for American cars. If you're buying a car that's very expensive, maybe you got the whole thing made somewhere else. So let's talk about site factors now. So site factors are factors that describe a location. They're not relative to its location. It describes actually where it's being made. So when we talk about site factors for industry, we're going to look at things like labor. Labor is a really important site factor. It's one of the most important factors. We want to get labor from an industry standpoint. You want labor for as cheap as possible. So labor costs, which are different around the world, are really important to some industries. A labor-intensive industry is an industry in which high wages and other compensation paid to employees constitute a high percentage of expenses. So labor-intensive in industry is different than when we were talking about intensive labor in agriculture. In agriculture, labor-intensive means you're putting a lot of human manpower into it. In industry, we're looking at employees that constitute a high percentage of your expenses. And many times, this might be something that involves like hand production, hand sewing, delicate hand work that can't be done by machines. But it's not limited to physically exerting. It's relative to how much you're paying. So if your wages are a high percentage of your overall cost for an industry, it's labor intensive. So any job might be labor intensive, right? In France, where it would be not labor intensive in India. Because if you look at the hourly wages, you could take any job and make it more labor intensive in a highly developed country. And it's not just the U.S. where it's harder to pay employees, right? Throughout all high developed countries, wages are higher. Wages are higher because the cost of living is higher. It costs more land to build our homes. Our homes are bigger. We have cars, we drive, our food is more expensive, and so our wages have to be more expensive, higher, or we wouldn't be able to live in our countries. Another important site factor is capital. You have to be able to borrow money needed to expand your factory or to build a new one. And the ability to borrow money really depends on where you distribute your industry. So things like Silicon Valley, think about the U.S. Silicon Valley had a lot of people who were willing to lend capital to the tech industry. And so the tech industry flourished in California. Another site factor might be land. You need to have enough land to accommodate large one-story buildings. These one-story buildings will have factories or storage facilities. And again, you have to weigh the cost of your land. Cheaper land will be in suburban or rural areas. More expensive land will be in the city. And it really then depends on a situation factor, how close do you need to be to the market. And it's very much like we talked about, again, with von Thunen. More expensive land would be for things that would cost more to ship anyway or that would go bad. When you look at, textile, we have changing things of values of inputs. So the production of textiles or woven fabrics and clothing requires less skilled, low-cost labor. So spinning is a process to make cotton. It's done in low-wage countries. It's labor-intensive. So in the U.S., it would cost a lot of money to have someone spin fabric. It would cost less money to have someone spin cotton in China. Apparel weaving, so then once the cotton is spun into thread, then you have to weave it. It's also going to be highly clustered in low-wage countries because it reduces the labor cost. So China and India produce most of fabric. And you see how a lot of it's hand work. So that means that if you were having someone in the U.S. make cotton yarn, it's going to be much more labor intensive. Not because it's going to be physically harder, but because it's going to cost more money. And that's about it for key issue 3.